thank Lynn for inviting me to have a show here, and Sarah and for helping me put it all together. And it's a real pleasure and honor to be able to have a show here. I started out, where did I start at? I've been, this work here in this room really represents a body of work that began in 1995 and when I was living in New Orleans. And I went back to New Orleans to go to graduate school after spending about 10 years working, doing construction work and also working in boat yards, building laminated some plywood onto the wall and started building these structures on the wall, and basically applied these scraps of wood to the structure the same way I did with these other pieces. And so that really led into these newer works, which are all based on the same similar technique of creating a form by taking thin sheets of wood and laminating them and twisting them. And then when the glue sets up, they tend to hold that shape. And they became more organic. And these pieces, these are all fairly recent. I did these in Houston after we moved over here last year. Actually, 2 years ago now. Time flies. And these are a little different. I really began exploring the organic shape, kind of curvilinear form, and pushing it a little further. I started by making some paper models, which you can see on the wall here. And at the time I was doing these, I discovered these maps on the internet. They were old maps of the Mississippi River that show all the historic paths of the river that the river had taken over several hundred years. And so I started printing them out and collaging them onto these twisted kind of curvilinear forms. And so they sort of became kind of river-like to me. And those led to doing these pieces. And some of these have the maps on them too. If you look on the side, you'll see some of these maps. They were done by the Army Corps of Engineers back in 1941, I think. And they're really beautiful maps in their own right. One of the major influences that I've had was working around boats. My father was a sea captain, and we grew up around the water, and I've always loved boats. And working with them was very interesting in terms of working with materials, learning how to shape things. And so that sort of led me into doing these pieces here. And there's another aspect to these, though. I discovered a photographer named Edward Bertinsky, who is Canadian, and he had done a series of photographs in Bangladesh about 10 years ago of the shipbreaking industry there, where they actually take these ships and beach them out on the beach, and they take them apart by hand. And I started looking at these forms, these deconstructed forms, and thinking that, this is really a direction that I'd like to look at in terms of sculpture. So I started looking into it more and more, and became quite interested in going to Bangladesh and seeing it myself, which I did this winter with my nephew here, Patrick. And we went over there and were able to actually get into these shipyards and photograph this operation. So it was kind of an interesting experience to see that. And at the time I was working on these pieces. And so these three pieces are very much informed by that experience. And they're all named after ships that I've either photographed or that we saw on a trip. Does anybody have any